There you are. Right. I can't be there today because the NHS says I can't. But David asked me to do this. And when he did so, he remarked that I'd known Anne longer than anybody. And in this, he's entirely wrong, of course, because there are 6 cousins who have known her longer than me. One's there, I think. Hello, Andrea, if you're around. And Brenda, who grew up with her in Leicester during the war and in Nottingham to some extent later. So they perhaps know more, but I've probably seen more of her over the years, and I am her brother, so I win on points. So that's that. To set your minds at rest and to save, uncomfortable shuffling in your seats and surreptitious checking of your devices, I reckon this is about 10 minutes. But that isn't excessive for 85 years. And I'm not going to cover it exhaustively. I'm going to look at some themes in what I call Anne World, which is a deliberate construction that Anne made, and I know why. Some of this you will know already, but not actually a lot of it. Some of it you certainly won't know, and some of it you would once have known and may have forgotten, and this will be a chance to remind you of it. So let's begin. My time starts now. As you know, Anne was born in Leicester in 1938, somewhat by accident, as she'll admit herself, and life would have gone along pretty normally, I think, from then on, if it hadn't been for the fact that Hitler kicked off some entirely unnecessary unpleasantness in Central Europe, which led to Dad being called up and carted off extraordinarily, if you look at my notes, to South Africa for a bit. And it was while he was in South Africa that he was sort of taken in, as many of the troops were, by a local family in Cape Town. Come around for tea on Sundays, have a cheese sandwich or a cucumber sandwich, whatever it was. And I only mention this because about 20 years ago, Anne told me that she'd been seeing a consultant, a South African lady doctor at Southampton Hospital, who turned out to be the granddaughter of the same people, which is a bit spooky. One of those small world things and entirely irrelevant for any other reason. One of the remarkable things about the whole wartime campaign my dad was involved in, and I've seen Saving Private Ryan and that kind of stuff, and it wasn't like this, is that these guys seem to have extraordinary amounts of time on their hands. Dad was picked up and sent off to Egypt and hung around in the desert. All that stuff you've heard about it, El Alamein and the invasion, Libya, or Tripolitania, I think it was called then, and then up into Sicily, and he invaded Italy. He was pretty good at invading places. But every month, his unit, the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, produced a magazine. I've still got a load of them. David will have a couple of these by the time you see him. It's extraordinary. This one is 144 pages long. It's filled with articles, cartoons, reviews of football matches, all kinds of extraordinary stuff. Every month they produce this. And one of the features of this magazine was a double-page spread every month called Our Babies. And in, I think, about 1942 or 3, there is the famous Hello Daddy photograph, which you may well see or have seen already, of Anne, which appeared in Tosh in the Our Babies section. And it was thus that Anne, because these pictures weren't just looked at by doting dads, they were looked at by all kinds of homesick men in the desert. And so Anne accidentally became a kind of force sweetheart of the North African campaign quite early in life. And it was a connection with North Africa that she maintained throughout her life. You'll be surprised to hear. Anyway, Dad kept all these magazines right through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, back by Gibraltar, and brought them home. And Anne saw him in 1943, I think, or maybe late 43, for the first time. A stranger turned up at the house in Leicester. And somewhere along the way, he picked up, this is family folklore, a bunch of bananas, which were unheard of in the war. And one, of course, was reserved. It kind of had Anne's name on it. And this strange, probably quite smelly man gave her this banana. And history reports that Anne promptly burst into tears, not of joy, but of terror, because she'd never seen such a thing before and had no idea what it might be used for. I think she overcame that fear later in life. Dad was taken off again to prepare to invade France, which he did. And then he went off through France into Germany and spent the winter of 45-6 in Berlin, something he never talked about. And still, they kept producing these magazines. This is the actual, how has it survived? The May 1945 edition, which David will now have. And there on page 20-something, page 20, helpfully annotated by Anne, is a picture of her, age 6, with the word me written underneath with an exclamation mark, just for the avoidance of doubt. So yet again, during the European campaign of World War II, Anne reprised her role as a kind of pint-sized Vera Lynn. And she was making sure nobody missed it as well. I'm just having a pause where I consult my notes. I don't want to repeat myself too much. That's allowed. Dad came home from Berlin early in 46, and 9 months later, by some miracle, Ginny was born. And then, probably due to some kind of over-enthusiastic carelessness, I came along in 55, by which time Anne had left home because the age difference, which is a feature of our relationship almost to the end of her life. We lived at 363 Queen's Road. Anne went off at 17, no, earlier, I think, 15, to live in the nurses' home at Nottingham General Hospital. She'd actually gone to grammar school in Long Eaton, which was over the border in Derbyshire. There was nothing available locally. And she told me years later that she found this slightly embarrassing as a teenage girl because she had to wear the uniform. And they just hadn't thought it through. It was called Long Eaton Grammar School, and they couldn't fit all that on the badge. So they had to abbreviate it to legs. So this teenage girl got on the public bus every morning with the word legs written across her chest. And I think she used to take the blazer off and hide it sometimes if it was warm enough to do so. Anyway, she must have left there, I think probably at 15, maybe 16, and left home and went off to live in the nurses' home in Nottingham, but used to visit. And thus my earliest memory, not just of Anne, but frankly of anything, is from the late spring or summer of 1958. I was three and a half. I was sitting under the table in the back kitchen at Queen's Road. Mum was at the sink. And I was playing with dinky toys and corgi toys because we had a carpet in that kitchen which was on a kind of grid pattern, rather like cities like New York or Milton Keynes, places like that. And it was very good for all kinds of car disasters and traffic jams and so on. And I heard a voice calling my name, and I looked over. She was behind me. And Anne, I knew it was spring or summer because the back door was open. And Anne was kind of silhouetted in the doorway. And she came over and just scooped me up in a big hug. And the memory ends there, which is quite a good place for a memory to end, actually. I'm convinced this is real. I know how memory works. When you retrieve a memory, it gets stored away and restored, like digitizing vinyl. So they can become more clear, but at the same time, perhaps more corrupted over the years. They get falsified. But I'm absolutely convinced this one is authentic, and it's a nice one for me to think about with Anne. It was the same year, of course, 58, that she got married to Don, and I've been very fragmentary memories of the wedding. It must have been late in the year because certainly the wedding pictures, even the grayscale, look bleak, don't they? I mean, they really do look bleak. And there was that coat. Mum was aspirational, and she hadn't missed the fact that the Queen was dressing Prince Charles in rather smart double-breasted coats and little shoes, and she got some cheap knockoff for somewhere. And I think she thought, well, if it's good enough for the Queen, it's good enough for me. and off we went to the wedding. What do I recall about that? Nothing. Maybe a bit of the reception. Remembering Don's parents looking quite small at the opposite end of a trestle, a square of trestle tables, and what seemed like an unreasonable number of brothers and sisters of Don, which actually was the case almost. A cake somewhere, as the 3-year-old boy would remember, and that was that. Anyway, Anne and Don went off to live in Loscow. He was working for the coal board, and they had a coal board house. I don't know if it was Grace and Favour or they rented it, whatever. It's quite a decent-sized house, as I recall. Gone now. And it was there that the 3 kids were born. I remember visiting in the afternoon sometimes, Sunday afternoon for tea or whatever. And then Don must have changed jobs early in the 60s, because then they moved to Hallington Drive, which I remember. That was the first move. And Anne started, inspired by her North African experiences, kind of became nomadic for the next few years. And it was also during the Hina period that Anne made her major contribution, one of her major contributions to the world, by inventing the date slice. And thereafter it became completely impossible for most of the rest of her life to visit Anne anywhere, for any reason, whether you were there to visit for the weekend or just read the meter, without hearing the words, I've just made some date slice. Would you like a piece? And this went on eternally. The Tunisian date industry has taken a considerable hit in the last few years with layoffs and starving children. So I urge you to get baking. Save the date. You know what I mean. Then what? Southall, Selby, Southall, I forget the order. Off they went. Cornwall, Farnborough, Winchester, Hong Kong, back to Winchester, and so on. They kept on the move. I left school in 1973 and took a year off to go travelling and grew a beard. This is relevant. And I got back. I went on a long 12,000-mile road trip around America where we got shot at, mainly in Alabama, I remember. It wasn't personal. It's just their way. I got back and I had a few weeks before I went off again to get shot at in Israel. And I thought I'd go and see Anne, so I hitchhiked, as one did in those days, down to Cornwall to visit. Was it Benton Gimps? It was near Perranporth, anyway. And got there. School, it was early September, school had just started up again. We had tea, and one by one the kids were sort of sent to have a bath and go to bed, and Anne and I were left. Don must have been away on this occasion, because he doesn't figure in this at all. And we sat downstairs very quiet. Anne was knitting, as she often was, and I was reading. And during the middle of the evening, Anne said something that in any other, if anybody else on earth had said it, I would have wondered what they were talking about. But because it was Anne, it just seemed normal. And she said, excuse me, but it's time for the cat to go to the toilet. I have to go and supervise. This seemed okay. And off she went. Now, the truth is, she didn't actually say that, and I have to kind of insert a footnote into her life here. It was the early 70s, and things like this were considered acceptable. It wouldn't fly now. I mean, you could do it now, but if you did, people would comment, and if enough people commented, there'd be a report, and you'd get a visit from the authorities. It's rather like that dog in the Dam Busters, the dog that dare not speak its name. And, it's true, he was a very, very black cat. Extremely black. What she actually said was, excuse me, it's time for Sambo to go to the toilet. I have to go and supervise. There, we got that out of the way. I'll restart the clock. Sorry, everybody. I don't know why I'm apologising. Now, for some reason, the cat had got it firmly in its head that there was some kind of fearsome predator that lived in the garden in Cornwall, that would leap out of the bushes and devour him at his most vulnerable. So Anne had to stand guard every night, waiting, like a ninja perhaps, to fight off whatever this beast was. It never seemed to happen. And then Sambo, would be brought back inside and put to bed because he had a bedtime. And Anne resumed her knitting and we were chatting a bit. And suddenly, at about 10, she said to me, Nick, it's 10 o'clock. It's your bedtime. And I looked at it, I thought, no, I've got to challenge this. So I said, Anne, I was very brave. I said, Anne, I don't have a bedtime. And she looked at me, I've got a beard. It's not this beard, it's an earlier version. And she did that thing. I've been practicing this, hang on. You'll all know, if you knew Anne, she did this eye slide. I've been trying to work on it, but I can only do it if I hold my head in place. She kind of put her eyes to one side, look at you without turning her head, to check whether you were being serious or not. And she realised I was being serious. And we both began to laugh. And it was a sea change, really, because I'd gone from being baby brother to someone who didn't necessarily have a bedtime. And I think the last sleepover I'd done was in Selby when I was about 12, so I had a bedtime then, but not now. Didn't happen. And things changed after that. I want actually to jump ahead now from 1973 to give you hope of an ending, to 1999, I think, or 2000 maybe. Don had obviously died in 95. And one day Anne phoned me up and said, would you, Margaret, like to come for lunch on Sunday? Which was nice, but kind of felt odd. I thought, you're up to something, aren't you? And we went down. And it was the Questa period. Went in, there was certainly evidence of a roast dinner being prepared. And also, over in the corner, date slice for later. Good, excellent. And extremely tall, thin, very nervous man called Ian who we were introduced to. I thought, yeah, there's definitely something going on here. And it was during lunch that Anne explained that she and Ian planned to get married, maybe a year or two down the road, and that her exact words, as the senior man of the family, I would like you to give me away. Well, my first thought wasn't, blimey, this is the 21st century. The patriarchy is withering. Why are you asking me to do this? Ignore the cat. Hello, Toby, yes, so we're talking about Anne. Shh. That was my second thought. My first thought was, what an honour. I would be delighted to do this. It would be a wonderful thing to do. That was my third thought. My first thought was actually, bloody hell, I've been promoted from baby brother to senior man of the family in one bound. Anne would love this, wouldn't she? So it's okay. Look, hang on. Excuse me. You see the culprit? There we are, Toby. Right, off you go down. Now, my first... Toby, stop it. But I realised at the time, or the day after the wedding, actually, I did go down to Kingsworthy. I met her at Lichgate, did that arm linky thing you do, and only on those occasions, and gave her away. But the next day I realised this had been like a field promotion in time of war. Those scenes, we've seen them in films, where someone says, Corporal, everybody else has been shot, so you're in command, just till we get back to HQ. And I got back to HQ the next day and realised, it was just all an illusion, really. Okay? I'm sorry, he's a bit of a needy cat. Cats were a theme in Anne's life as well, this reminds me. Obviously, the later years, there was all the fostering going on, and we discussed Samba. Back as far as the Queen's Road days in the 50s, I'm told that Anne had danced, when Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock came out, she used to dance with Tuppy, the Queen's Road cat, holding his tail like a partner and rock and rolling around the house with the cat. I hope he enjoyed it. Toby's gone quiet, that's good. I mentioned Anne's World. Anne's World was highly regulated. Everything, there was a time and place for everything. Cats had bedtimes, brothers sometimes had bedtimes, kids had bedtimes, date slice was made, so on. I forgot to mention another aspect of the Cornwall thing, because this wasn't perhaps part of Anne's World that everyone would recognise. It was on that same trip to Cornwall in '73 that I discovered Anne had talents as a rally driver. I've got out of sequence. Who cares? I'm not recording this again. She had a Mini. It was one of those proper Minis, not like Minis are now, which are about the size of Range Rovers. It was a tiny weeny Mini with a big central dial and switches straight out of Fireball XL5. And no seatbelts because it was the 70s. And the kids were off to school and we tore around the narrow, winding lanes of Cornwall at just terrifying speeds. And she never lost this. I can remember as recently as maybe 7 or 8 years ago in the Honda Civic period, being given a lift one day from Hinton Fields to Winchester Station, and said, "Oh, there's some traffic lights ahead, temporary traffic lights. There's a bit of a backlog, but it's okay. There's a shortcut. We can go left here, and then we're going to take a right turn there." Perfect. And I could drive by this time, and I was frantically working phantom brake pedals in the footwell, but she never had a crash. I don't know how that happened. Where did Anne's World come from? I say it was highly regulated and managed, curated almost. Why? Well, our mum and dad, they were fine. They weren't bad as mums and dads go. We all make it up as we go along. But if Mum and Dad World had been a country, it would have been a country where the trains, if they ran at all, never ran on time, where there was a constant state of economic crisis, and where the bin men were pretty much always on strike. It was just a bit chaotic. And I think that's partly factored into Anne's decision to go off and live somewhere else at 15, 16. Certainly when she was 18, Ginny left the country. When I was 18, I left the country and then moved to London. And none of us ever really went back, apart from to visit. If Anne's World were a country, it would be one in which the trains always ran on time. There would always be date slice in the buffet car. The bin men would never go on strike. And cats would be everywhere, but in a very well-regulated and trained kind of way. I'd like to take you with me on one last visit to Anne's World and make a suggestion to you as well. It's late afternoon at Hinton Fields, any time of the year. Ian's in his chair there. He's been reading the paper and he's spotted that there's a new programme on TV that evening about steam trains. But he's also noticed that it clashes with Corrie. And he's conflicted. He's working the problem. But he knows he's not going to win. He's just got to navigate a way through it somehow. Anne's busy on her iPad. Sudoku, whatever it's called. And you're doing whatever you do, reading or piddling with something. And suddenly Anne makes an announcement. You've already had your date slice. That was 3:30. It's okay. And shut up. Anne makes an announcement. She says, it's 6 o'clock. And you know what that means. She does the ice slide. Would you like a G&T? Well, the correct answer, of course, is yes. And she rises from her seat and she makes her way to the kitchen, leaning forward slightly from the waist, as she always does when she's on a mission. It propels her forward a bit more quickly. And she comes back with a G&T for everyone. It's that moment in the evening. It's Anne's World. Everything's in good order. So I'd like to suggest to you that at 6 o'clock tonight, wherever you are, you announce to yourself that it's 6 o'clock Perhaps look at yourself sideways. So would you like a G&T? Or something else. Something else is acceptable. And you say yes, and you go and make it. And at 6 o'clock this evening, we all raise a glass and go, cheers, Anne. I think she'd like that, don't you? Okay, Toby, let's go.